Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Peaceful Parenting Podcast. Do you have a child who argues with you about everything? That is exactly what we're going to be talking about today in this solo episode with me. We are going to talk about why that might be happening and what you can do about it. Before we dive in, though, I want to remind you, as always, that we appreciate any reviews that you want to leave us on Apple Podcasts. And we appreciate it if you would rate us and review us on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. It's the best way to get our show in front of new listeners. And when we reach new families, we can introduce them to peaceful parenting and help them to have happier home lives and more peaceful home lives and be the parents that they want to be. So we really appreciate that when you all do that. I also wanted to let you know that we are looking for parents to coach on the podcast. You know, some of our episodes are coaching episodes. So if you would like a chance for free coaching and to be on the Peaceful Parenting Podcast, send me a DM on Instagram at Sarah Rosensweet or on Facebook where I'm Sarah Rosensweet, and I'll get back to you about the next steps to see if we would be a good fit for you to do that. So let's talk about when your child argues with you about everything. First of all, it's probably a sign that your child is pretty bright. So that is always a good thing. And it's also a sign that your child isn't afraid of you. And we know in peaceful parenting, we don't want our children to just do the right thing because they're afraid of us, or to do what we're asking them to do because they're afraid of us. We want them to do it because it's the right thing to do, or because they want to cooperate with us. So two good things about if your child is always arguing with you: they're pretty bright and they're not afraid of you. So those are two good things. You can give yourself a little pat on the back. There are a couple of reasons that I see in my coaching and that I've experienced in my own life when kids are arguing with us. And one is that we often have to take a look at our limits. Are we actually being too strict? Are they arguing with us because we're being too strict, or we're being arbitrary, or we're being controlling? So we really want to look at how's our goodwill bank, right? Like, are we most of the time pretty willing to listen to our child's point of view, to be flexible, to be, trying to take their preferences and wishes into account whenever we can? Or are we mostly just, setting limits because they're easier for us or they're our preference? So, and are we setting limits that are health and safety limits, or limits that just we think are a good idea? So really we want to look at, are we being too strict? Are we being too controlling? Is that goodwill bank sort of empty? And when I talk about the goodwill bank, I mean, is that's like that bank account that should be nice and beefy when we are, being flexible and doing a lot of teamwork with our child, that there is that amount of goodwill in there that our child knows, most of the time my caregiver really wants to work things out with me, and they really want to be flexible, and they try to accommodate me when they can. And so it's really, gentle parenting or peaceful parenting, whatever you want to call it, isn't about, now we prioritize, we used to always prioritize the needs of the parent. That's more in conventional parenting. And some people think that gentle parenting or peaceful parenting is about now prioritizing the needs of the child. And really, it's about teamwork, right? It's about how can we work together so that everyone's needs get met, at least some of the time or most of the time. So if your child is arguing with you about a lot of things, it could be because that goodwill bank is sort of empty, and your child recognizes that you're being controlling or arbitrary or too strict. So really look at being intentional with those limits and ask yourself, is this necessary? How could I make this work? Maybe not right now. Maybe we can, make that work tomorrow or whatever. But really ask yourself, how have I been doing lately at working with my child and being that team member and saying yes when I can? So that's the first reason that I often find, and these aren't in order of, priority, it's just the order that I happen to think of them. That's the first reason that I see a lot of parents whose kids argue with them a lot. Another reason could be that is actually the flip side of that you're not being too strict, but that you're being too permissive. And so it could be that your child knows that when you say no, it's not really a no, that they can argue with you and they will wear you down. So if you are, and sometimes that happens because we don't think about it before we say no, that we have that knee jerk no, and that when we actually do think about it, and I wouldn't count this as being permissive, this is just being like, kind of thoughtless. But when our child knows that that the no doesn't really mean no because we haven't carefully considered that no, And that if they give you enough reasons and they are persistent enough, you'll change it to a yes. So really stop and think about, does this need to be a no? And you can train yourself to take that pause when your child asks you something. Let me think about that for a minute. I remember my kids used to say, you have to say yes right now. And I would say, if I have to give you an answer right now, the answer is going to be no. I need a little bit of time to think about it. So stop and think before you say no to something, because sometimes we say no to things and we don't mean it, and then it turns to a yes, which teaches our child that no doesn't mean no, right? No means maybe. So stop and think about it. Another reason why sometimes the no turns to a yes and our child is aware of that is just because sometimes we're exhausted, right? Or we can't bear to see our child upset. So really think about, again, do I have the bandwidth to stand behind this no? If you don't, okay, everybody, it's ice cream for dinner tonight, right? If you don't have the bandwidth to stand behind the no ice cream before dinner, it's much better to, make the occasional exception than to say no and then to give in when your child, shows enough upset. On the other hand, we also, we might be firm in our no, but we can't bear our child's upset. So really remind yourself, if your no's tend to turn into yeses, because your child is upset and you can't bear that upset, remind yourself, it's okay if my child is unhappy about a limit I've set, right? We don't have to be mean about it, of course, but there are limits that we're going to set as parents. That, of course, those intentional limits that are about health and safety, or the things that cannot be a yes. It's okay if our child is unhappy about that, really. Like, we don't, raising happy children, the goal isn't that they're happy all the time. There will be times where we have to set limits as parents where they're unhappy. So if you find yourself turning those no's into yeses a lot, whether it's because you didn't think about it, whether it's because you don't have the bandwidth, really don't say no if you can't hold on to that no. Or if you find your no's turning into yeses because you can't bear that your child is unhappy, really remind yourself that it's okay if your child is unhappy because of a limit that you've set. Like, children, like everyone, there's hardship in life and there will be things that they don't like, and we can come alongside them with compassion. So that's another reason why kids sometimes argue, is because they know that the no doesn't really mean no and that it can be turned into a yes. So if that's you, I think I've already given a lot of the fixes that you want to try and do if your child argues because they know that they can change your mind. Another reason why kids tend to argue a lot is if we give them too many explanations. And of course, if you don't think your child understands why there's a no, you want to explain it to them. I'm not saying we never explain anything to our children, but we want to ask ourselves, is there an information gap here? Does my child really not understand why we're not going to do glitter at 7 o'clock at night? If they really don't understand, of course you want to explain to them, sweetheart, it's almost bedtime and that's a really big project and it's going to make a big mess. So we're not going to be doing glitter tonight at 7. If they really don't understand that, then of course you want to explain it to them. But if this is something that you've been through before and you think that they know what your reasons are and you still are trying to explain it to them, that gives them a sense of like, oh, they're explaining it to me, so I'm going to offer the counter arguments, right? So the explanation is often an invitation to that counter argument, but I'll clean it up, but I'll get ready really fast, or, whatever the things are that you're explaining. And of course, going back to my first point, we want to be flexible whenever we can, but sometimes it's just not the time to do glitter right before bed. And if you're explaining it too much, there's subconsciously your child is going to be providing the counter arguments. And the reason why we explain too much is because there's part of us that thinks, if I explain this well enough, my child won't be upset and they'll stop asking, right? So, if you've said no to another piece of cake, and I know that's not a great example because a lot of people really, believe in feeding kids intuitively and not limiting their sugar. However, I'm going to use this as an example. Anyhow, if you say no to a second piece of cake and you say, well, too much sugar isn't good for your tummy, or, it's bad for your teeth, or whatever your reasons are, your child might say, well, I won't have any sugar tomorrow and I'll brush my teeth again. And, whatever, they're going to come up with those reasons. Whereas really there isn't anything that we can say that's going to make our child understand it so well that they'll say, oh, you're right, I didn't want to do glitter anyhow, or I didn't want to have that other piece of cake anyhow. So that's like our subconscious hope, is that if we explain it well enough, then they will understand and they'll stop asking us. And that's never going to happen. They want what they want, and that's human nature, and that's totally okay. So just be careful that you're not explaining in the hope that your child will agree with you, because that's often what I see happening. And as I said, if there's an information gap, yes, for sure, explain it to them. But if it's not an information gap, you can just say, you know what, we're not going to do glitter tonight, and let's go and, we have time to read 5 stories or whatever it is. So just make sure that you're not over explaining to try to get your child to see your point of view so they'll stop asking. What I do, those are sort of the most common reasons. And, if you still have a child, even after you've taken all of this into consideration, who's just asking you over and over again, they're just hopeful, right? They're just hopeful that maybe you don't understand how important it is to them, or maybe you'll change your mind. And I used to say to my kids, and this is with so much compassion, and this is in direct opposition to something I have heard said in kind of a cold tone. I've heard that asked and answered, and I don't like that. I guess it depends if you could say it really nicely, but then when I've heard it said, it's been sort of like end of discussion, asked and answered, right? My version of that, which is, you know what, sweetheart, you can ask me as many times as you want, and the answer is still going to be no, right? With so much compassion. And remember that sometimes it's hard to understand it's hard to empathize when it's not something that would be important to us. So if our child is, really upset about something small, like not being able to do glitter right before bed, it's really hard for us because we couldn't be like, well, how would I feel if I couldn't do glitter right before bed? So remember that small kids are upset about small things, and that's totally appropriate. What's the feeling underneath? Because we always we want to empathize when we do have to say no. And when our child's arguing with us, we want to empathize. So the feeling underneath might be disappointment because they love doing glitter glue, or it might be feeling powerless because they don't get to decide everything about what they do and when they have to go to bed. It could be, yeah, I guess in that case, it's mostly 2 things, disappointment and powerlessness, and maybe frustration. So you know what it's like to feel powerless or frustrated or disappointed. So connect with that. And so that's really we have set that intentional limit, and we're not going to change our mind. You can ask me as many times as you want, and the answer is still no, sweetheart. I'm so sorry. And really try to find that empathy. If you find that your child is still arguing with you, calm yourself. It can be really hard. If this is triggering for you, maybe you weren't allowed to voice things as a child. There wasn't room for you to argue with your parent, or would have been scary for you if you had argued with your parent. It could be that this is a trigger for you, and that it feels kind of dangerous, subconsciously dangerous, what your child is doing. Get in touch with that. Remind yourself, I'm safe. My child is safe. This is not an emergency. No one's going to get hurt here, emotionally hurt or otherwise. And it's okay if they argue with me, and I don't have to take this on, right? This is not an emergency. So calming yourself, recognizing if you have any triggers, and you can also get playful. Okay, I think that we've talked this one, around a lot. So you don't have to be totally serious. Like one of the, you can ask me as many times as you want. That's more of a serious answer, but you can also find a way to get playful. You can like fall down on the floor and say, are we doing this still? Like, I thought I already answered you. Okay, ask me again, right? You can get a little bit playful about it. And I think finally, if you try all of this stuff and you still find that your child is arguing with you a lot, maybe look and see if your relationship is a little bit frayed or a little bit strained, and really work on connection. Because sometimes when kids are arguing a lot, or adults even arguing a lot with people that they love, it's because they're feeling disconnected. And that is not by any means, this is why I saved it for last. I don't think that is there are some parenting experts who say that, you know, oh, what's the word I'm looking for? Disrespect or defiance. That's what I'm looking for. The defiance is a relationship problem. It can be, but there's also so many other reasons why your child might be defiant or why they might be arguing with you. So you can look at that, like, how's our connection? But you can also have like a beautifully connected relationship with your child, and they're still arguing with you about everything because that's their, that's the way they are. They don't take, they are very perseverant, and they don't like to take no for an answer. And that is such an awesome quality for a child to have. Well, actually, let me take that back. It's such an awesome quality for an adult to have, not such an awesome quality for a child to have, to be that, have that perseverance. But this is something that you want to nurture in your child, to never give up. And it's inconvenient when they're 4 or 6 or 8, but it's going to be great when they're 14, 16, 18, or even into the adulthood, to have that perseverance and that sense of never giving up. So remind yourself that there is a silver lining, that this is such a good quality for them, even if it makes them harder to parent. And I hope that was helpful. Oh, I had my last tip that I wanted to say. If this is your child and you've tried all this stuff, maybe they can join a debate team and they can use their superpowers for good, and for learning and enriching themselves. So take heart. You're not alone. I hear this all the time. This is really common. And as I said, especially for brighter kids and for parents who are practicing peaceful parenting and their kids aren't afraid of them, right? So I hope this was helpful. I would love to hear what you think. You can join us in our free Facebook group, which is called Reimagine Peaceful Parenting with Sarah Rosensweet. We have such an amazing community over there. So join us over there. Let us know what you thought of this episode. Again, if you are interested in coaching for the podcast, for free coaching, you can reach out to me on Instagram at Sarah Rosensweet, or on Facebook, Sarah Rosensweet. Send me a message and we will see if it would be a good fit. I am looking for people to coach over the next couple of months for the podcast. Rate and review us on Apple and Spotify so we can reach more people. And thank you, as always, for being here on another episode of the Peaceful Parenting Podcast.